All right, thanks, Aaron, for that introduction. Like you said, my name is Zach Lunak. I'm from UW Milwaukee. I teach within their medical lab science program. I teach immunology mostly, but also teach a microbiology lab. I don't work clinically anymore, but prior to this meeting, I would have liked to thought that I could step foot in a clinical microbiology lab and start working. But after this meeting, I don't know if I'm smart enough after hearing a lot of you guys all talk, which has been a really good meeting. Also, there appears to be, and I could be wrong, but just came here to Wisconsin a couple years ago, there appears to be a minimum height that you have to be to work in a microbiology lab. We would have a really good basketball team, I think, if we competed against other microbiologists across the nation. No, just kidding. All right, so I'm here to talk about how do we develop critical thinking skills for our students. So we'll discuss the framework of an MLS curriculum, how we use that curriculum to develop critical thinking skills for MLS students, but really it also applies for MLT students as well. We'll touch on Bloom's taxonomy, course sequencing, so how we bring students from sort of that lower level of thinking and learning to higher level of learning. And I'll provide some examples of some of our microbiology, what our microbiology labs look like, what we teach within those labs, to provide examples of kind of where our students are at, whether they're going to be training with you guys right out of college or doing their internship with you, kind of just see, okay, this is where most students are. We'll also touch on, I'll touch on some proposed course curricular changes that I'm personally thinking about, but also my colleagues as well, to help critical thinking of our MLS graduates, which I think we all agree on is really important. So the goal of an MLS program, it doesn't matter if it's UW Milwaukee, Marquette, or an MLT program, is to develop entry-level scientists, right? And so what exactly does that mean? So this is taken from our accreditation, those four things: ability to perform a full range of testing, right? Role in development and evaluation of test systems, diverse responsibilities in QC and QA, and be professional and ability to communicate with others. What's actually not on there is the last one, which is problem solve and troubleshooting techniques. That's actually listed under the description of the MLS profession itself. But entry-level description does not include that. I do think that our programs, all programs, really strive for that, though, that our students are able to troubleshoot as much as possible. But thinking about it and being realistic about it, I think an individual, the first talk I attended, talked about it takes up to a year to be able to troubleshoot some of the stuff that we're talking about today, working on the job. So we'll try to get to that level. I always say our goal of a program is to get to the point where our students can be efficiently trained in any area, right? That they understand what's going on. They might require a little bit more training in that area, and then hopefully sooner rather than later, they're able to troubleshoot and critically think, okay? So how do we get these students to entry level? You guys might be familiar with this. This is a Bloom's taxonomy pyramid where we have lower level thinking skills. And so you're thinking about, recalling facts. It's your intro level courses, and then starting to apply those facts and that information into maybe real life scenarios, and then getting up to evaluating and creating, which I consider level 3 or critical thinking, right? And so it's important at this when you first start teaching, and this is my biggest issue, and I think it's a lot of teachers' issues and trainers' issues, is that it's really hard not to start at level 2 or level 3, especially if we're training on the bench. I know that when I was working the bench and I was training a new grad, and I was all excited. I'm like, hey, this is how this works, and you can just tell it's just glazing over, right? Even if they just already received this information as an intern, you want to start at level 1, okay? Start low, work your way up to higher level of thinking. See what they know, see what the student knows, all right? Then you can work your way to level 2 and level 3, all right? It also takes a mixture of objectives and learning outcomes, okay? So we have cognitive learning, okay? That's our intellect, Factual information, I consider this when we're trying to teach cognitive skills, it's our basic lectures, right? We're teaching how pathophys works, how these bacteria cause disease, pathogens, etc. Okay, cognitive skills. Psychomotor skills, lab skills, right? Learning how to streak a plate, learning how to do a gram stain, proficient. Those are really important. When I first started putting this presentation together, I was just going to leave it as that, those two things, right? Cognitive and psychomotor. If you know your stuff up here and you can do it hands-on, you should be able to troubleshoot and critically think. And then more I thought of it, affective learning is probably just as important, if not more important than cognitive and psychomotor. I'm starting to think of training students. Has anybody trained the student that looks unengaged, or trained an employee just looks, they could care less, right? But they know everything off the top of their head. They know how to do everything, right? But they're not committed, right? They don't value the testing like somebody would, right? I guarantee you cannot teach critical thinking to that student. No matter how much they know, how they know how to do it, if they're not valuing the testing, if they're not being professional, you're not going to be able to critically think or teach them to critically think. So I think affective, if there's any more point on there that you want to take a point of, is that affective learning is probably just as important as cognitive and psychomotor skills. You have to properly sequence these objectives and these learning outcomes. Okay, so we talked about that in the previous slide. Start from lower level, go to higher level. So I'm not going to list everything that's here, but your cognitive learning, you're going from things like, hey, define X, list all the important tests for this particular pathogen. What does this pathogen look like? What does it grow on? What's within this media? Application is to be able to tie things together with information that you learned in lower level 1. So I can think of it as, hey, if you had a bluish green colony on a blood agar plate, smells like grape chips, what should the gram stain be? A lot of students will look like, what? That's not a straightforward question. It is to us. We understand that I'm talking about E. coli. Right? No, but they don't know that. They're kind of thinking, this is not a straightforward question. Okay, I need to know that that's probably Pseudomonas. I need to know Pseudomonas is gram negative, right? So it's gram negative. So that's sort of the thing, that's sort of the level we probably get with students, is try to get them to start thinking of knowing multiple things, tying them together. That's level 2. Problem solving, some things like case studies, for instance, where we tie in a bunch of information, and we end with that, usually with a program. Psychomotor skills, we first get students in a lab, we hope that they can identify what we're doing as a gram stain, right? That they know that that's a gram stain, they recognize it, their readiness for it. They don't necessarily know how to do it, but they're going to start practicing it. Then towards the end of the lab, towards the end of the course, they know how to do it, they know how to do it well, and then they start developing their own technique. We call that adaptation, okay? So those are psychomotor, cognitive. Affective I'm being quite honest, it's really hard to teach. All right, it just is. As much as we care and value this information, there's going to be some students that just can't get to that level of appreciation that we do, maybe, for instance. But there's ways, and we might be able to chat about that later. So here's our microbiology curriculum example. Again, this is very common amongst other programs too. I'm not here to promote UWM, but this is how they do in North Dakota, just other programs as well. Well, they'll have typically like a microbiology 1 dot, and that's sort of where they have a mixture of maybe level 1 objectives and level 2 objectives. A microbiology 2 where you have, mainly level 2 objectives, some level 1 in there. And then advanced micro 3, which is really high level. It's sort of the clinical internship piece that they get to. And reality is, these courses, though, if I'm being quite honest, should all have some level 1 components, a review component in them. Okay, it's one of the biggest mistakes that I make as an instructor. They go right from micro 1 to micro 2, and I pick up where they left off. I don't spend any time reviewing. It's a big mistake. You should always try to review, go over key concepts, whether you're teaching on the bench or in the classroom. I think it's important. All right. But one thing I want to point out here, it takes time, okay? This is 2 to 3 semesters of learning to getting to that level where I think, to be honest, our students are just right there where they might have the ability to critically think, but we also have to think about, they're not just learning microbiology, they're learning chemistry, heme, coag, UA. It's quite realistic that it might be 6 months later, they go from this Micro 2 course to the Micro 3 course, okay? So it's a big gap, all right? So the bottom line is we always have to go back, even no matter how advanced the student is, could be even a grad student, current employee, we have to go back to level 1. Might not take a semester like it typically does for a new student, might take a day, but we have to go back to level 1 just to see where we're at. Here's some just examples. Again, this level 1, just identifying significant bacteria on a plate. What are the key biochemical tests? Performing those biochemical tests. In the lab, everything in this course is pure culture. They're just learning the techniques, how to perform those techniques. When they get to Micro 2, that's when we start adding things where they're taking, where we have mock clinical samples. So they're expected to kind of distinguish normal flora from common pathogens. They might have more than one pathogen in a sample. So it's just a little bit higher level. We don't necessarily, the expectation is that they know how to perform the common biochemical test when they get into this lab. So we don't spend too much time exactly how to do it. It's just they're given a sample and they're allowed to work it up. So it's much higher level than the clinical Micro 2. And then the Micro 3, again, is that internship piece usually, and that they're thinking about how they want to organize the workload on that given day, that they're completing testing, the quality control, they're understanding the quality control and the importance of it, and that they can correlate those results with not just the biochemical or testing results from the other instruments, but also susceptibility testing as well. I just wanted to point out just what I mean by this. So this is just an example, medical microlab, the Micro 1 course. It's okay if you can't read it, but it's just a very step-by-step instruction for the student. That's what we mean by lower level. It's, hey, grab a slide, label it, put it in rack 2, that kind of stuff. This is the first time they're doing it, so it seems, a little bit hand-holding, and it actually kind of is. Because again, it's the first time the students are going to be doing this kind of stuff, so it's very much laid out from as the semester goes on. You'll see this is lab 1. As the semester goes on, we'll increase a little bit more of the higher level. They do perform unknowns in this lab at the end, but it's all from pure culture. Whereas the Micro 2, again, sorry, it's a little busy here, but they're working up samples. They're mock samples. It's not anything stressful or anything like that, but they're streaking out on the plates. You can see the instructions here are a lot less detailed for the students, so it's kind of up to them how they want to go about things. We do demonstrate how they would streak on a plate and that kind of stuff, but we just demonstrate it and allow them to do however they want to do it. We have a list of tests for them. If they think of a particular pathogen that they might have, we provide those tests for them, and they perform the test and record it and report out an organism. You really get to see right away who is receptive to this kind of stuff right away, who is very engaged and can critically think and are comfortable, I should say, with not having a step-by-step instruction, right? They're going from, step-by-step instruction to here's a sample, streak it and find out what's growing in it, right? And it's an eye-opener for some, but for most it's very exciting for some because they're committed and they're engaged. So what I found out is about 50% of our students, you could tell the thought process is very obvious that they got it, right? Things are coming together. They were formulating their own, we have some students that might ask, what should I do first, the gram stain or this, or it's up to you, right? If they're just coming up with their own independent learning was for about 50% of the students, they got it. 25% of the students, it's a challenge, okay? It's not that they're not trying, it's a challenge to get them to that next step. The hardest, though, was the 25% of the students that you think are getting it based on their report. They can write the report, they write the result, everything is correct, but their thought process wasn't, it just didn't make sense. Like towards the end of the course, we would get questions. It's just like, how is everything correct and you're still questioning about a MAC and a CNA? Or that stuff like if you're looking at a group of plates and you have growth on a MAC and you don't have growth on a CNA, it should be gram-neg just in your head. But we weren't getting that with some students. And so we started putting these plate reading quizzes together where we just had a set of plates that was from a particular sample. They'd have to determine if it should be coming from a sterile site. Is there any normal flora present? Is it contaminated? What's growing on these plates based on the growth? And from the site, is there a likely pathogen that's growing? Just to get them starting to think of what they would be in the real world where they get a set of plates before they did any testing. Oh, I'm thinking it's E. coli. I'm thinking it's, Staph aureus, based on what's going on the plates, and they'd have to answer these kind of questions. And then that way we could really help develop that skill of plate reading, I guess, before they went on to their clinical site. So how do we know if curriculum works or if we're doing an okay job? We look at benchmarks that are provided by NACLS, which is our accrediting body. Graduation rates are always pretty high. Job placement rates are, this is always funny, NACLS requires us to have 70% job placement rates. If our program is anywhere near 70% placement rates, I would be fired, because it's been 99 to 100 for the last 10 years, obviously. But board of certification rates, I'm kind of torn about this. Every program director and instructor ties themselves to board of certification rates. Okay, is there any students in here? Few. Are you right now thinking of the boards? Right, and we promote the boards, and everything is about the board. We have to study for the boards, and all our objectives have to link about the boards. What's your board certification rate? And so if you go to these clinical education meetings, that's what people talk about. Hey, what's your certification rate? What is it? Ours is 93. It's like, okay. So because we're obsessed with it, we have to be above a certain threshold. And that's how we've always defined ourselves, our board of certification pass rate. Like it's this gold ticket. And I'll get off my soapbox. It's not, essentially. Okay. We get other feedback that I think is more important. We have an advisory committee where we have clinical affiliates tell us what they like about our students, tell us what they don't like about our students. I think that's important. We have surveys from students that say, hey, this was what I liked about the program, this is what I hated. And the most critical feedback we got from graduates and from clinical sites too was preparing them for the workload and managing the workload. I thought that was interesting. I think that is a critical thinking piece of being able to work in a setting and understand, I gotta perform this testing before I do this testing, and time management. That's what most of our graduates struggled with, according to our grad survey. And I thought that was interesting. So I really thought, this was before they asked me to talk about this, I was like, I gotta improve on that. And then I was thinking about this critical thinking talk and piece, and I thought, what are ways we can improve on that? And yeah, we could set up a simulation lab and do all this kind of stuff, but really I think it's to put students in situations where they don't have a right or wrong answer. I was the same way as a student. Hey, what's the right answer? What's the wrong answer? What do I need to know for this test? What's the test going to be like? That's what your minds are at. But reality is that that doesn't really, in my opinion, improve critical thinking and actually translate into good tech work, I guess, in other words. And so these are some of the ideas that we're considering in some of our courses is more writing. And I'm not talking about a research paper and looking at, citing and all that kind of stuff. It just could be informal writing, thought process, asking questions, again, that don't have a right or wrong answer, formulating your own opinion. What would you do first, this or this? Why? Research. Unanswered question, coming up with your own hypothesis and tests. Incorporating some of the research into courses, that's another idea. Open resource exams, you asked me this like 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. We're not doing open resource exams. Now I'm kind of like, well, actually it'd be kind of nice because you can actually go into higher level questions earlier. And I've done this a little bit with, like, we have a little 1-credit virology course, and everything is open book, open resource. It is kind of nice because I can go into some higher level questions, and you can really see what the students really truly do understand, that foundational knowledge, and they're able to apply it, versus the students that are struggling with it. And you can kind of work with them then to improve on that. So this we're trying to avoid is, what do I need to know from the students? What do I need to know? Do I just need to memorize this slide? Do I need to memorize this slide? Do I need to know this information? And that's what we're trying to get away from. Because we could probably get the same question. I assume you guys get the same question on the bench. What would you do? Am I doing this right? Just constant and trying to improve that confidence of students formulating their own opinions in independent thinking. All right. Is there any questions? I don't know if we want to go to the panel first, or if there's anybody questions for me at first.
No, we can ask, does anybody have any questions for Zach about the teaching that they're doing? I guess they're going to make this easy for you, and they don't have any questions right now. So then what we will do is we'll go ahead. Thank you so much. That was really great to know about what the program's doing. Then will our panelists come to the front and sit at the table over there. We do need you to use the microphones, so please don't just start talking without them. It's really making it difficult for anybody who's going to be catching this afterwards and a recording if you don't use the microphone. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to our next slide set. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to have all of you introduce yourselves again, if that's okay. So you just saw Zach talk, and then if you want to introduce yourself, Megan, real quickly, and we'll walk down the table, just say who our panelists are so they know.
Am I good to go? Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm Megan Selle. I'm the Microbiology Supervisor for ThedaCare Laboratories.
I'm Heather Alvarez, Lab Manager, Prairie Health Columbus. I brought Sasha with me. Sasha is a student at UW Stevens Point, just finished her clinicals with us, so be very kind to her. And she already has a job, so you don't have to try to recruit.
My name is Jorn Bansberg, and I work at Vernon Memorial Healthcare. I'm the lead microtech there. I'd like to do like a role play with Sasha here, like a mentorship role play, and you guys can grade me, not her, me. Okay. Yeah, you ready?
Yes.
Okay, might as well do that now, I think. So I was working last week, and I looked at my Vitech results, and they said all 4 of them of different types said low reactive biotype, and I've never seen that before. So I just kind of freaked out. I was like, what? What's going on? Vitech's supposed to give identification answers. But these are all low reactive biotypes. I mean, there's a few that actually are, but you rarely see those. So what would you think of that, Sasha?
Since I don't know much at all, I would probably check the manual to see if that has any answers, because usually if you have some sort of code and you're like, what does this even mean? You can get something from that, or a senior tech that's around, like, hey, I've never seen this, pull someone aside, and usually someone can give you an answer on that.
10 points for her, right? Yeah. New tech. So let's see. So essentially what the low reactive biotype was saying to me was that nothing happened on the card. So if that was the case, what would you think?
I would ask you to walk me through the process that you did for your cards. Did you have the correct McFarland? Did you actually inoculate any of it? You know, do you have your correct card in there? Did you program it correctly? So I'd try to walk you through, like, did you do these steps? Tell me what you did. Did you miss anything? Because usually, see if it's tech error.
She's onto something, I think. Okay, so I assumed nothing happened, so I hauled the cards out and I looked at them, and they were rather clear of fluid. There was no fluid on the card. What would you think of that?
So if there's no fluid in the card, you know, I'd ask, did you put it in the little vials with the fluid? And if you did, maybe check out, is it a problem with the Vitex? And if you didn't, we could try it again and see if it works that time and use fluid that has been inoculated.
We like her. I think we should consider ignoring Heather and trying to recruit her. What ended up happening was I reset the cards, and they all worked. But after I cleared the lint off of the rubber seal on the door of the vacuum chamber. So that was what the problem was. But thank you for that. Good job. All right. So essentially what I was just wanting to say is that I want you to grade me on whether I was A, judgmental, whether I let her finish what she was saying before I interrupt her. I think I did that a little bit, but that's one of the hardest things to do when you're teaching critical thinking, is to just shut up and sit there and listen. Independent of what they're saying, one of the things that you can do is once they're finished, you can redirect into deeper material, or you can ask a question as to how this could be when another option might be better. Some other things that you can do to help her along her way is when you come up with a hard question, just solve it out loud, so that they can see what you're thinking rather than just knowing the answer. But mainly, if you tend to interrupt, and I know this is hard for everyone, and me included, then you turn off the thought spigot and have the tech lose interest. So it's a pretty big deal. But as Zach was saying, you really have to have the background created before you can even have this conversation, and I think she's got plenty of background. So I want to thank you all for listening and ask us some good questions so we can flail a little bit here. Okay.
All right, thank you, Jorn and Sasha, for that demonstration of how it might look when you're actually working with a student and mentoring them. So we are talking about, it's still critical thinking, and Alana went over this morning too, the definition. There are many definitions. If you go online and Google, as we've already talked about, you'll find that there are tons of different definitions for what critical thinking really is. So I thought the funniest part about this was that they put in the line, using it in the sentence, that professors often find it difficult to encourage critical thinking amongst their students. So I just thought that was hysterical. And this was another site, if you looked somewhere else, this was actually on Indeed, the hiring agency. They had a whole little list of critical thinking skills and what they were. So now we'll start in with our questions, and we'll start with a couple of iClicker questions about staff training. And this is just one more slide. I laughed. If you had to pay for a class to talk about critical thinking, they want to charge you $195 for it. So we're getting training from each other today for free, which is really great. Okay. Does your laboratory have a specific training on critical thinking that you provide to new employees? So go ahead and vote. So we have a yes, we have a specific training material that we use. B is yes, we're supposed to teach critical thinking, but we don't really have anything specific. It's up to the trainer. And then C is no. So. Okay, let's see what we think. So most of us realize that we are supposed to be teaching critical thinking, but it's really kind of up to us. There isn't anything specific we don't have. Training materials, and so that puts a lot of pressure on all of us to think how we can be better at doing this. And then there are good people, or a good portion of the people that are saying, nope, they don't have anything, so. And the same question, except this time we're asking it about students. So go ahead and we'll probably get pretty similar answers, I'm guessing. Yep. Okay. So this is where we start in with our discussion. For those of you who did answer either A, yes, that you have training materials, or B, that you know you're supposed to train, but you don't have training materials, are any of you willing to share? And we're going to start with our panelists at the table. So Megan, what do you do in your laboratory? Or where did you fall on this answer?
So we would have fall in the B category as well, same as the majority of the answers. We're supposed to be teaching it, and it's really up to the trainer. We don't have any protocol. Even for our competency, we pull questions out of procedures for questions, problem-solving questions, and we really don't have a great program for that. And I really hadn't given it too much of a thought until we got MALDI, and the MALDI has totally flipped everything upside down, and now we've got a mix of, we had a lot of turnover, a lot of seasoned microbiologists, we've got a lot of new microbiology techs that don't have a lot of experience with biochemical, VITEC identifications, and doing culture review and review by seasoned techs, culture workups by seasoned techs. We're seeing a lot of overworking cultures, just taking answers as they come off of the analyzers, and there's very clearly to me a piece that's missing, but we just don't know quite how to teach it.
Okay, Heather, how about you?
Is this just teaching it or assessing it? Just teaching?
Just teaching right now, yeah.
Okay. I am in the same category as Megan. We don't have any formal ways to teach critical thinking either, other than, I'm from a small lab. I might have 4 people at tops working at any given time. So for us, it's, Sasha will probably attest, after pretty much a week or 2, you will see everyone at some point say, hey, Can you take a look at this? Can you help me? Can you look at this? I'm not sure. Like, everyone is very open to asking advice and help. And so that's just something that we all encourage of our new employees too. Like, if at any point you are stuck, just ask somebody else. But there is no formal tool for teaching it.
Thanks. Sasha, from a student perspective, what do you notice about teaching with critical thinking? Have you had people try and teach you some of these things?
I think a lot of people who are teaching it are kind of teaching it by accident, because they're asking me, well, what do you think of this? What is the next step? Or they're having me take charge. So I'm reading a plate. They're like, well, you get to decide what to do next. And it's like, well, you can either start your biochemical, you do your gram stain, but, there's not a lot of actual structure, but I think some people just naturally have critical thinking skills, and they kind of teach you it by they are using it.
Okay, Jorn, you're next.
Yeah, we have very little structure on that on critical thinking. However, I have a checkoff list that I use when I train people that requires you to have some of that critical thinking, like when a call might be wrong on the Vitek, like how a bacteria looks and where you might find it, and what normal flora might look like. And so you essentially have to recite it to me for the different sources. So that works very well. I try to do it once and then do it again later to get some traction on the teaching. But I also encourage people to ask me questions, like Heather does, if there are any. And I ask people to look at their cultures from the perspective of the patient. Would you think that this would be relevant to work up on this patient? I ask people to look at the cultures from the point of the provider to see what they would think and how fast they would make it need a preliminary on an inpatient, for instance, and things like that. But as far as actual competency documentation, we just do like questions from procedures, and that's about all we do. But yeah, checkoff list is the best thing for me, and then I sort of can sort of assess where people are at. It seems to be working quite well, actually.
Okay, great, thanks. Anybody else in the audience out here? What do some of you do does anybody have actually a planned set training on critical thinking? Does anybody have materials like that? No? Okay. Then for those of you who are responsible for training, what do you like to do? Do you have some ideas you could share about what you like to do when you're training new employees or students to help them with this skill?
So I'm kind of a recent graduate. I'm class of 2020, and I think I agree with Sasha. With a lot of techs, you either kind of get critical thinking or you don't. And when I train techs and students, my critical thinking was already made at that point, so I didn't really need to be trained that way. And I mean, I start with just, like, with micro, looking at a plate, tell me what you see. What do you describe on the plate? Because that's the first step. And then just going through my workflow almost, and just teaching them how to do the workflow of a microtech seems to help, or workflow in chemistry, or if they run into a problem, okay, so this is a problem, why is it a problem? How do we fix the problem? And just not really teaching, but just kind of working through my workflow seems to help.
Timothy?
Yeah, and we have a very similar, we don't have a very structured way of teaching and material to teach critical thinking. But as someone training other people or leaders in your area of expertise, I believe that for training critical thinking, I think you have to build confidence in your trainee, give them autonomy to think, and let them make a few mistakes here and there if it's not critical and does not compromise the quality of care for your patient. And I think that's the only way they can learn how to think effectively and find a more efficient way to do things the next time they face that same issue or similar issue. So that's how I teach my team in my lab. That's what I allow them to make some decision that they know and what they're going to take, what kind of action they're going to do or take to resolve that. I may have the answer, but I usually don't give them the answer right away. I don't wait to see what they are. Because ultimate goal at the end is not about how we get there, right? It's about, can you get the end result? You know, I may go straight, I may have a more efficient way to do it. They may go around and get it done, but it's getting done. And then later on, just show them, say, hey, next time, you don't have to go around all this. As long as you're not compromising patient care, you can go straight this way. And I think that's how we promote and inspire critical thinking in the next generation of medical lab scientists. So that's how we do in our lab.
Great points, thank you. I think there's something great to be said for helping people's confidence by not shooting down their ideas right away and letting them go with it a little bit and seeing that they can get there, and then maybe redirecting them later as they've already built up that confidence. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I'm gonna.
Can I add to Tim's quick?
Yes.
So I do the same thing, Tim, if I'm working in chemistry and someone goes to put a tube on the analyzer and I know full well the reagent's not loaded, or I know full well the barcode's turned backwards, I let them go. Like, let the analyzer give all these flags and then let them work through it to see, like, can you read those codes? Can you figure out what it's telling you? So that we can solve the problem. Because I could stop you right now and say, wait, your barcode is backwards, but that doesn't help you. So I do the same thing.
Thank you. Great points. So this was a question somebody wanted. They said, hands-on work at the bench with an experienced tech is considered a really good way to teach students critical thinking skills. But often financial challenges can lead to students spending less time on the bench, or you have so much work to do that you rush through and you kind of take over the work that you should be letting that student do. So let's talk a little bit about that. Are we facing this challenge? And if so, how are you counteracting this trend? So my panelists up front.
Yes, absolutely. We are experiencing this. So we've got a very high workload volume, and our microbiology students get 4 weeks of microbiology. So they get only a couple of days per bench, and they're running very quickly through there's no, I really like the ideas of going back to level 1, building that up, but we don't have the time. We don't have the time that when we get a student in on the bench, we're already at level 2 or level 3 already, and we need to come up with a better way of stepping that back a little bit.
Heather?
So I guess my answer is yes in different ways. So I won't have a student for 4 weeks in micro. I'll have a student for a full rotation, and we will put them, you might be in heme this week, but you're gonna go to chemistry today because that's where it's easiest. We fall into trouble with this same question. For example, we're super busy, right? So we're trying to crank through micro really fast. Well, now there's 5 patients that need to be drawn, and there's no, Sasha, can you help us draw? Which she's way done with phlebotomy and doesn't need any more practice, but she says yes anyway. She's set up so many Cepheid cartridges because that's where she could help at the time because we couldn't do micro at the moment. But on the flip side, we've great, we've read plates together. All that's left is setting up Vitex. You go. I'm gonna go do other stuff. I know she knows what she's doing. So we have the issue, but we work through it in different ways where we don't have to push the students through so fast. We give them a little bit more autonomy and just oversight and we let them help because we need help.
I think it was a good point that both you guys made on that, and something as educators we don't think of is we know that the labs are obviously short-staffed and it's hard to train students. But for instance, right now what we do is they go through their rotation and then they take their comprehensive exam after. And I actually think it's probably best if we do the opposite, where they learn the material again didactically, took the comp exam, and then did their rotation to make it less strenuous on the lab. But maybe that's for other discussion.
You couldn't get that. Could you reiterate that?
Yeah, long story short, we have the students take a test after their rotation because they get all the skills from the rotation. They might learn something in that. That's the thought. But maybe it's best to have the students take a comprehensive exam, at least what they learned didactically already, prior to going to their rotation, so it takes the burden off the short staff a little bit. So you don't have to spend so much time, if at all, going through the level 1 learning.
Jorn, did you have something to add?
Yeah, usually it's pretty hard to train because I don't get much of a chance to teach them since I don't work every day. But my last trainee was kind of wonderful because what I did was we just worked together whenever we could, and then eventually I just kept asking her, "Are you ready to be checked off?" And she said no, and she said no for like 2 months, and then like last week she said, "Yep, I'm ready to be checked off," and she's really good, you know. Just if you give it time and money, I guess, right?
Yeah.
It's just sweet. It's nice. So.
Sasha, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Sure. So, I don't know, I was very lucky in that how the lab was set up that I can kind of choose which section of the lab I wanted to do rotation. So that initial week, I was able to, we were more fully staffed, so I was able to have that slower workflow with about 3 different techs that first week to see how they each work through the micro process. And it kind of helped that it was busier because I was forced to learn, okay, this is what I need to do to get this done. And I really learned how to prioritize. Okay, I'm going to set my slides. They're going to dry. I'm going to start looking at this. And towards the end of this, when I was waiting for tech, I'd be able to kind of sort my plates into a way of, okay, I know these are all going to be mixed flora. We're going to be able to go through these. These I know we're going to have to work up. So it's like, you know, just having those few days of it being slower was really nice, but then I was forced into, not forced, but it was nice to be able to just get into the workflow instead of just being slow all the time, and you need to take your time. You kind of actually learn how to function as a tech.
Great, thanks. Tom?
Well, yeah, I was just talking with Jana because, and I'm not sure how this fits in because it's with our students who are doing the clinical rotations. You know, so they come to us for the last year. And so we do, and I don't know if all programs do this the way we do, but we call it a student lab, which is for the first maybe 2 months? 2 months? 3? 2 or 3 months. It's almost like that level 1 stuff, I think, folding in some of the levels 2 stuff. I know, and I think different sections do the student lab differently, but I'm most familiar with micro. But, you know, when we go through all the organism groups, we do a lot of the, you know, that basic, like the level 1 type stuff going over, and then some, okay, this is what you're going to be doing at the bench. We throw in, people at doctoral level throw in some clinical stuff for the context. So I guess, my question is, is that sort of a common way to do the clinical rotations for students? And the other one is just, thinking out loud, is that in some way, an approach to train techs? I don't know.
Heather, you had some materials that you shared that are in their folders, and Tom, so you can stay up there too. You both gave me some materials that I copied and put in the folders for people about training.
I did. So mine was actually how to assess problem solving. So what I sent Aaron is the pink sheet in your folder. And so one of the things we had talked about is how do we assess competency? Because when we're doing our competency assessment for all team, one of those criteria for CLIA is assessment of problem solving. And so this is the tool I use. I shamelessly borrowed it from another organization many years ago. And so I prepare this for the year. For every test system in the lab, I staple it together as a packet. My team has that year to kind of go through it and turn it into me by the end of the year. And so the front page is what it looks like. This is my example from last year. I try to pull a real problem that happened. So for 2022, My VITEC example is that you're reporting a VITEC ID and sensitivity. The organism ID is very unusual, although above 90%, so it kind of fits in with our talk today. And there isn't necessarily a right answer, but each staff member has to, what are your thoughts? Show me you can problem solve. It could be, I'm going to call St. Mary's. Okay, to me that's acceptable. It could be you're going to pull your resources. You're going to, there's a lot of right answers. So then I'll go through the packet. On the back side, I just put some other examples, because I do this for every test system. So for the Virogene last year, it was Staphylococcus not detected, but Staph aureus detected. Obviously, that is a mismatch. I actually had a staff member report this as a patient result because it came from the Virogene, didn't really pay attention. I'm like, it doesn't make sense, right? On repeat, they both are detected as we would have expected. For the Cepheid, you got positive for all three, flu, RSV, COVID, all at the same time. Possible? Maybe, but tell me some ideas on how you troubleshoot. You got a gram stain, it's pink and purple. You're running a strep on a rapid test, but you pull down the box and it looks very different from any box of a strep kit you've ever seen before. That's happened in my lab last year because of a back order. You have a CBC that gave you a platelet of 4. Patient usually runs around 100. You have a type and screen and blood bank, and the front and back type don't match. So I just pull one of these for every test system, and then they go through as they have time and turn it in. So that's how I fulfill then that competency requirement for assessment of problem solving.
Okay, great. So if you want to just show the slides a minute, too, and I'll let Alana go first, but if you want to flip back to the slide.
Really helpful to have that. As I'm thinking through this, and I train a wide variety of students and have trained at the bench, and I think something to be said, you absolutely have to have that time observing other people at the bench, getting your hands-on experience to learn how to do the work. But what I found is that helps them do the routine work. And the challenging parts, the ones that require the most critical thinking, are when things don't go right. And that's harder to get the opportunities at a bench to have the weird things happen in that scenario. But we've all had these lab experiences. We've had things go wrong. Telling our stories, telling our experiences of this time where I put the barcode backwards, this time where this came 2 different ways. Incorporating that into our training, into our stories, not only do people retain stories in their memory a little bit better, it helps to fill that gap for things you're just not going to see routinely on the bench. So I love that you have this pink form, and it brings up those same things. This is where something went wrong. If we can incorporate more into our training of this is a time things went wrong, explaining that to them and how we dealt with that might maybe better help people in the future for their critical thinking.
Excellent point. Our storytelling, the things that we tell people in a story, those are the things I remember from when I was a student still to this day, and they are going to take that with them, and they are going to remember that too. So the more we can tell those stories, that is just really an incredibly powerful tool that we can use. I'm just going to move us to this slide. This is kind of moving on to competency because we have been talking about the training. But the competency for those of us that are, under CLIA and the requirements for assessing competency of staff, if you have a CAP inspector come in, and not everybody has CAP, obviously, but if you do, you still have to have these elements that are here. And so it is the 6 procedures, you have to address each of them for every individual, for every test that they are approved by their laboratory director to perform. So it's a big task. And so thank you, Heather, for sharing how you do that one component of problem solving. That's part of critical thinking. Who else over here wants to talk to that, or how do you do the type of training or the competency testing on the individuals in your lab?
So we do a similar thing as Heather does. We pull out questions like that. Most of the time it's from a procedure or the issues that have come up throughout the year. The problem where I think that falls short is that that's very different than the real world. Like when you're working on the bench, when you see those weird things, it usually doesn't come up in training. And it usually doesn't, it usually comes up when those techs are on their own. And I think that's where we have a little bit of a gap. We can problem solve, but teaching that, assessing, what would you do if you were on your own in this situation? What would you do? I think that's where we fall short. That it just, I don't even know if you can cover that on a competency.
The rest of you, Jorn?
Yeah, I just, when things go south and I'm in training mode, I just let it happen and let them decide what to do as much as possible. But I really can't, the other one thing that I do is I definitely, when something goes south, then I share it with everyone because mistakes get the most attention, right? So that does help me quite a bit. And then I make a point of discussing issues related to competency, related to things that go south or go well on a regular basis, just to keep everybody informed. And that seems to work quite well. If you really focus on talking more than you probably should about technical issues, you really get quite far. But as far as assessing competency, it's just a one-on-one thing, and that we do. And then there's, of course, questions we have to fill out, sort of like the other two panelists here.
I think some of it goes back to being gracious in mistakes too. If we want our team to be empowered to solve those problems and try to troubleshoot and figure things out, then we also have to, recognize that they may not do it quite the ideal way every time, right? And kind of like how Tim said, if it's not detrimental to patients, that's okay. And they need to know that, that it's okay. It's okay if it's not perfect. You tried, you were on the right track, and you were really close. They won't try to solve problems in the future if if we're going to tell them it wasn't done exactly the right way.
Yeah, I make a point of not trying to punish anybody and just make it an illuminating discussion so that nobody feels like they're singled out at all. And most times I don't mention who did what, when, or how. It's just that this happened.
One of the things you said, Jorn, no, come up to the microphone, please. I'm just going to make a comment that struck me is that we highlight those things that are strange that maybe go wrong in our labs. What would happen if the stories we told were about the things that go right? When somebody actually does it the right way and catches something really cool, could we turn our stories into what they do right and make those the stories that we tell? So go ahead.
Hi. One of the things we do when we have an issue that involves critical thinking, or when I'm reviewing results that come through for our daily reviews and stuff, is if I find something that doesn't quite make sense, or that I've had to go back to the policy to make sure that it was handled properly, we have a weekly huddle in our department, and then I usually bring at least one or two of those examples, and we talk about it as a group. That way everybody's on the same page and understanding, and we get feedback about how someone might have looked at it a little differently than the other person, and it's a great learning experience.
I like that. Great.
I just want to clarify that I spend most of my time looking for people doing the right thing. So but the problem is that their attention really floats to the things that don't go well. So you have to use that too.
I wasn't insinuating that you were only doing things wrong, so I'm sorry if that came across that way. Okay, Tim.
So I have a question for the panelists, but I have a comment as well in speaking to the weekly huddle, and I will speak on behalf of everyone from our organization. We were recently started what we call a daily huddle, where every department is supposed to do that. Part of that huddle is we do offer recognitions, and as Titi just mentioned, adding in a daily good catch would be a great thing to highlight those scenarios. I think we all see them in the laboratory. I think as laboratorians we're humble and we don't always brag about them, so sometimes leadership doesn't know about them. So I think that's great, and it's great to encourage the staff to do that. So I do have a question, and this has been simmering since we were talking about critical thinking, both for the student and for the panelist about interviewing for critical thinking. So, Sasha, you turned me off. It's like, Tim, you're done. How many interviews did you have?
For a job?
For a job. Just your clinical?
Like how many places did she interview?
I'm sorry, that's what I'm asking.
Oh,
Yeah.
how many places?
Yeah.
I chose to interview at 3.
Okay. And in any of those interviews, were you asked any questions that kind of assessed your critical thinking skills?
Yeah, and I think they're usually called like those behavioral skills, because most of the critical thinking was what would tell me a time you had to deal with a difficult patient and what did you do, is like some of the questions they asked.
Okay, but nothing specific laboratory. Okay, which is fine.
Not
Which is
really.
fine. And I guess my question for the panelists and anybody else out here who's a hiring leader is, do you ask any kind of critical thinking type questions during your interview process, or is there an assumption made that they have those coming out of school?
We definitely do. I came across a traveler recently who was working for us who had an interview and to get a job, and the supervisor pulled out a notebook of white blood cells and said, "What are these?" You know, and the traveler completely didn't know the answers because he hadn't worked in a while, and that was the end of that. So people do that, you know.
Titi, did you have something you wanted to say?
Just a follow-up comment to, sorry, I don't like these, to Tim's comment about the DES huddle. When we do promote daily recognitions, and the nice thing about those is that it goes all the way up to the president. If there's things that are really, really good, that should be shared with the organization as a whole. And then I also wanted to call out, in the microbiology lab, I know you do regular rounding, right, with the text, so they use that as a teachable moment when they go through the laboratory to look at interesting cases. And then in the chemistry department, they also do the same and review different issues that come up. So if there's a quality control issue that was recognized by a technologist, they'll bring that up and give that tech recognition and then talk through the process relating to how the quality control, what raised the flag, what caused their, spider senses to tingle, those types of things. So I think all of you educators and teachers in the laboratory, don't give yourself enough credit for all the, what do they call those where it's nonverbal? You don't really think you're teaching critical thinking, but you are. So I just want to recognize all of you for that, whether you recognize that in your teaching every day. But you do convey that. So thanks.
Thank you.
So Tim, I'll follow up to your question. We do not ask critical thinking type questions from a department level. Our organization as a whole many years ago kind of went by the mantra that we will hire the right personality fit, and we can teach the hard skills, but it's hard to form somebody into the soft skills that make them a good fit for us. So while I will, ask questions, and there's sometimes, how comfortable are with phlebotomy, or, tell me the types of equipment you've worked with. I might throw in some lab type questions, but, HR will come with a list of behavioral based questions, and that's kind of consistent from one to the next, because we want the good fit.
All right, go ahead.
So I know we're talking a lot about the trainees' experience, but does anyone have any comments on how they assess their trainers, or how do you pick who is going to be doing your training? So our micro department has over 60 employees in it, so we have to have a lot of people who can train. And it's hard for us to, or we haven't come up with a really good way yet, I think, to assess the abilities then of our trainer and the knowledge that they are actually relaying to the trainees. Does anyone have any thoughts to share on that?
I'm on the completely flip side because I'm very small. So all of my staff are, whoever is in micro on the day that my student's in micro is training in micro. I definitely have team members who are better at teaching than others. Sasha could probably attest to that. But I don't think it matters personally. I think the students learn from those who don't teach well just as much as they teach from the good. I think, you'll learn things you don't want, like, oh, I don't like the way they did that. Like, I'm not going to do it that way. Or, you'll learn how you don't want to communicate. Or I think you can learn something from everybody, even if they're not the best teacher. So for us, it's you don't have a choice. You can't opt out of training if there's a student in your department for the day. You are the teacher, but we also train our students very much like we train our new employees. So we don't do, like Tom was talking about, we don't have some kind of student, I don't remember what you called it, but we don't do that. It's just all teaching the work, the day-to-day work and operations and kind of what all those mean. But there is no opt-out.
All right, does anyone have any last concluding thoughts they really want to share? We're going to have to wrap up here so that we can get out on time. Daniel.
So I just have one thing. Do any of you have any experience working with non-native English speakers, and how to assess, like when you're going through a training process and you're trying, you know that there's something going on in their head, and are they looking for the words or are they looking for the information? How do you assess when there's that communication issue going on?
Good question. I don't know if anybody's had that experience. I can see it would be maybe challenging if the
I did have
language.
I did have an experience with that. I was teaching a gal from Mexico who works for us to draw blood from a heel stick on a baby, and so it didn't go very well. But then I just kind of took over and showed what to do and talked about it as we were going through. But then I wasn't sure, like Daniel was saying, if she actually understood what I was saying, because there was a little bit of a language gap. So I just waited a few days and I said, so what did you get out of the time when we tried to draw blood out of a baby? And she listed off like 5 different things that she learned. And I was like, yeah, she's got it. She may not be able to do it, but she knows what she's supposed to do. So.
I've not had that experience. Although I am married to somebody who does not speak English as their primary language. So for my best tip is just to ask, I notice sometimes that you're not answering right away. Is that because you're looking for the words and you want me to help you try to find the words, or is it because, you don't understand? If you want help, just say, I need help. I think it's just putting that out there so that they know how you want to communicate and you know what they need, rather than both of you just sitting waiting because you don't know. I don't know. That's what worked for me.
Thank you for that. Good point. All right. Well, I want to thank the panelists and everybody that has been involved in this conference today, in giving presentations and in providing information and sharing things from your laboratory. But at this point, we're going to thank them kindly for being up here, and we are going to move on to what is going to be my favorite part of the day.